Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on the space today. We're really happy to be having this conversation, and we hope to get solutions, get to understand what is happening. Of course, most of us who are here would know that, human rights observers and lawyers for the Maasai people are pressing Tanzania's government to halt plans to forcibly evict tens of thousands of the indigenous nomads from their ancestral land at the eastern edge of the Serengeti National Park. Of course, last week we saw there a violent clash breaking out after government surveyors and security forces were said to have begun to demarcate 1,500 square kilometers of land that Tanzania reportedly will turn over to a United Arab Emirates-based farm to manage as a game reserve for commercial hunting. Well, these are just reports we have had, and we want to really understand what is going on. I'm very happy to be having a very, very able panel today that will be helping us address this particular topic. I do see at least 3 of our speakers. I'll just ask Roland if he can actually just tap on the mic icon on your screen so that you're able to come on as a speaker. I see we've sent you a request there, but let me just introduce my panel today. I know we are expecting to have Tundu Lissu all the way from Tanzania, who is rather from Tanzania and is a deputy chair of the main opposition party of Tanzania, and that's Chadema party. We also have Dr. Stella Nyanzi, who is a Ugandan human rights defender. She has been very vocal on any ills and any rights issues and injustices in her country, Uganda, and beyond. And she remains very vocal in defending human rights. And of course, let me just mention, of course, we also have Stephen Corey, who will be joining us. He's still trying to come on. He's a human rights defender, a British human rights defender, let me mention that. And he's been working with issues about indigenous rights activism. And of course, we have Roland Ebole, who is a researcher working with the Amnesty International. And of course, let me mention Joseph Moses Ole Shenge, who is a resident of Ngorongoro, from where the Maasai community that has been affected is from. And he's also a human rights defender from Tanzania. Let me also mention we will be having Maria Sarungi, who is also a very passionate human rights defender, all the way from Tanzania. She will be joining us a little later, and I know she will be coming on. I'm hoping that all our speakers will be on soon, but I just want to begin with Joseph, who is a Ngorongoro resident. Joseph, the situation all the way in Ngorongoro, we've heard of reports, and we've even seen pictures and videos circulating on social media where Maasai indigenous people from your country have been forcibly evicted from their ancestral land, or rather they're being evicted until now. Joseph, maybe you can tell us what is exactly the situation right now in Ngorongoro? Joseph, if you can hear me. Joseph, if you're having a challenge connecting, just tap on the microphone. What do you call it? There's a small microphone appearing probably on your screen. Maybe you can tap on it and then you're able to speak. I don't know if that's all right. I'll come back to you, Joseph. But let me just hear from you, Roland. I know Amnesty International has been very vocal about what has been happening in Tanzania. And we do know that Amnesty, released a press statement talking about eyewitnesses saying that security forces started shooting rather at the protesters with live ammunition and also used tear gas, injuring 30 people thereabout. Roland, really, what is the situation and what kind of reports have you been receiving as far as the situation in Ngorongoro is concerned?
Thank you very much, Leah, for having me. And good evening, good morning, good afternoon, your viewers from our listeners from wherever you are listening in from. So, as Amnesty International, one of the things that we have observed is that there has and continues to be unlawful, forceful eviction of Maasai indigenous people from the Loliondo 1,500 square kilometer of land. I must say that from what we have gathered is that the Maasai people, the indigenous community there, has not been consulted. This is against international standards where indigenous people, specifically indigenous people who have a lot of claim for their land in terms of heritage, where their well-being is, where their livelihood is, and where their way of life basically is, must be given free, prior and informed, must give their free, prior and informed consent before any action is done on land where they reside in. Of course, the state says that it is doing this form of eviction, which I believe began with planning much earlier, because we are told that this is actually the fourth attempted eviction, with the government coming in with the security forces from first days of June to start putting on beacons. Some of these beacons, we are told, were put at night, and the Maasai people protested that by going to remove the beacons, and that's where conflict ensued. And we basically know that this kind of eviction and the kind of conflict that we have witnessed has caused a lot of injuries. We know there are numbers of people, hundreds of people who have fled to Kenya, have crossed the border. We know there are people who've been arrested, at least 20 of them, and they're now being charged with murder. Some of who are community leaders who were arrested before, the said murder of this policeman in Ngorongoro, in Loliondo, happened on 9th June. So we are seeing a lot of issues that are already emerging. We are seeing journalists who are arrested and released. We are seeing human rights defenders fleeing the country. We are seeing a number of people really afraid even of living in their own homes. And so what really started as forced eviction is really taking, so many angles, including, curtailment of, the right to freedom of expression, the right to even association, because protests have been dispersed, including protests that, were to happen in Nairobi, on Friday last week. So we are seeing a lot that we really must continue condemning and saying that, the government of Tanzania specifically must stop the brutal security operation in Loliondo, and they must really consult with the Maasai people on any action before they do it on their land. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. I'm not sure if Joseph is able to speak now. Joseph, are you able to speak now? Joseph, if you can, and if you're seeing a microphone icon to the bottom left of your screen, could you please tap on that so that we're also able to hear you? But as I give Joseph time, and of course we're having Tundu Lissu coming on, we're waiting for him. Was also Stephen Corey, who is a human rights defender, a British human rights defender who deals with indigenous rights activism. I see you there, Maria. Before I just go to my next panelist, let me just introduce Maria Sarungi, who has joined in, as she's also a co-host in this conversation. Maria, I know this conversation is a much needed one. We have seen videos and pictures circulating on social media. Just what feeling have you been getting about what's happening in your country, Tanzania?
Thank you so much, Leah, and it is really great to have this conversation. I think for an audience that might not be that much in the picture of what is going on in Tanzania, and I really hope that we'll be able and think things or making it public. So I think that as I was saying, this is a conversation that was way overdue. And I think that it is very important to have this conversation happening at a time when we are not hearing, or we're just starting to hear now, a lot of the information coming out. And strangely enough, or well, not so strangely, and I think in this case, I think Roland has been able to talk about media limitations, social, activists, social media people being basically restricted in reporting some of the things or making it public. So I think that one of the most important kind of conversation we would like to have is just to understand what exactly is happening and what exactly are we looking at in terms of the conflict that's going on, what is the dispossession of land that is going on, and what does the law say. But I also hope, I think, to see a much broader discussion around this for Africa. I think that Africa is going to see more and more similar situations, not only for Tanzania or East Africa, but going broader and broader as well. So I really hope to have a really good conversation on that. And I do hope that despite the fact that we did have a little bit of technical issues, but slowly we're coming back online, and we will be able to have a very fruitful discussion about that. And also about, as I said, a more general perspective of Africa. Thank you very much, Leah.
Thank you, Maria, and I'm happy that you're here as well. I like what Roland talked about. They're just giving us a perspective of what the Amnesty International has been talking about. Of course, mentioning what has been happening, the brutality that has been meted on the Maasai community that has been forcibly evicted from their ancestral land. Stella Nyanzi, I know you are a passionate human rights defender. And just looking at what is happening in Tanzania, Stella, what does this really tell you about just the respect for human rights, not just in Tanzania, but in Africa?
Right. So thank you very much for creating this space. As an East African who respects regional solidarity, I think although I am not a Tanzanian, it's important for us East Africans from different countries in the East African community to join our voices in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Tanzania, the Maasai people. Because the Maasai are in Kenya, the Maasai are in Uganda, the Maasai are in Tanzania, and we have nomads in almost all the East African countries and in the Great Bloc. So I think an issue that affects a Tanzanian, an issue that affects a nomad affects me as an East African, as an African, as a human being. Currently, I am in exile. I am displaced, although it's a different dimension to displacement. I too am forcibly removed from my homeland. I can't go home to Uganda. I was an exile for a short while in Kenya, and the Kenyan community of human rights defenders, including Roland Ebola's organization, helped join resources to ensure that my children and I had safe passage and that our issues were articulated. If we did not have solidarity as a family, we were just a small unit, a single mother and her 3 teenage children. If we did not have the solidarity of human rights defenders and the media in Kenya at the time, but also in East Africa broadly, the issues we were facing as Ugandans fleeing from Uganda would not have been articulated. So I entered the space mainly as an East African mother, as an East African woman, an East African wife who feels passionately about what's happening to the displaced people in Tanzania. I also want to establish that for me, as a woman who celebrated the entry of Mama Sumia, I am so heartbroken and disheartened because the issues of the state of Tanzania are under the leadership of a woman that was hailed for her leadership, and feminists in Africa, womanists, people who believe that gendering of politics would perhaps introduce peace, are heartbroken at what we witness. The state institutions, the police, the courts of law are under the leadership, the executive leadership of a woman. And so wherever she is, she should be part of this call. Maria and Leah, you're in Tanzania. Call the president, Her Excellency, to come and join this conversation, because I am aware that although there is judicial and executive autonomy, her direction in this purpose concerning the Maasai, her guidance, her voice, her solidarity as a Kenyan, as an East African leader, as a woman leader, as a mother, would give a lot of credibility and credence and power to the local Maasai dwellers, some of whom have been displaced, some of whose community leaders have been incarcerated. We don't know why. And so before we even converse about the police and the foreigners and what, we want Mama. We want her to be accountable as the head of state, as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as the executive, the person in State House. We want to hear her voice on this question. And so very much for me, there were questions, and I was looking forward to the lawyers. I was looking forward to listen to the lawyer who has been at the forefront of the conversation, because ultimately there's a legislative question about land tenure system. We know that the Maasai are a nomadic people. Okay. We know that they are an indigenous people whose customary land rights must be taken care of, particularly with regards to their lifestyle as nomads who have collective ownership of a property, who have collective access, usage, and ownership of a customary land. And so questions that are legal have got to be explained to us and broken down to the people who owns the land under question. If it is indeed customary land that belongs to an indigenous people, as Ron has explained, people who depend on it for their livelihoods, for their culture, for the livestock, for their way of life, for even their economic sustenance and food, and habitation, and they must follow the rains and the dry season to be able to have access for their cattle. Then someone has to explain to us the land usage, land access, land ownership rights over the land in question. Having said that, as a woman human rights defender, I condemn the police in Tanzania and the police in Kenya for breaking constitutional rights of local community protesters under their community leaders who are exercising constitutional rights to peaceful demonstration. I think the right, freedom of assembly and association has been highlighted by Roland quite ably. I think that peaceful demonstrations are part of our constitutions in East Africa, in our different East African countries. Therefore, the police has no right to violate constitutional rights and civil liberties that are given to us by our constitutions. And so I hold the police in Tanzania, the police in Kenya. In Kenya, I read about a protest that was organized in Nairobi heading towards the Tanzanian embassy that was actually violently dispersed. In Tanzania, we have heard about the violent exchange of both live ammunition, tear gas, but also object materials, which have injured both state operatives as well as the community. Shame on the police in Tanzania, shame on the police in Kenya, because today it's the Maasai, tomorrow it could be another community in one of our East African locales. And so the detention of peaceful demonstrators, the detention of non-violent demonstrators in police detention centers, some of which are unknown. I have heard about Tanzanian comrades going to different police stations to look for the individuals who were arrested from Ngorongoro. Some have not been identified as yet. They are detained without known charge, although I have heard that the charge of murder is also floating around, and some are detained in places that are not known. That is contrary to the law. that provides a number of rights for people who are suspected and perhaps under trial. We don't even know the charge. And so I condemn lawlessness of the police, lawlessness of the detention, people who are holding them in detention. And so really we see that it's a question about law enforcers. It's a question about lawlessness. It's also a question around state violence, state-inspired violence. We heard about the unfortunate murder of a police officer, of a state operative. And I think for me, before we blame any local community participants, we must question why non-violent people protecting their land, asking questions about why are you introducing these markers on our property without talking to us. Okay, those questions are valid questions. I think that Roland, in his able introduction, told us about the international standards that require community engagement, community participation, community selling, ensuring that communities understand when their indigenous customary land is going to be repossessed by the state. And I think for me that if that has not been done, then there is disrespect on the part of the state, particularly the investors who are acting with armed gunmen empowered by the public purse to violate and infringe bodily harm on local residents of Ngorongoro. And so the last issue for me is this issue around the need to commercialize customary indigenous land. I have read about tourism and investment and investors coming from, I don't know if it's Western or Eastern, Northern countries, but the idea that we are going to commercialize the property of our people and compromise their right to life, their right to livelihoods, their right to community, their rights to assembly, their rights to free speech and free expression must be interrogated and also must be condemned if indeed it is confirmed that in the name of investment for tourism, okay, for tourism, the commercialization of a people's livelihood is taking priority over the very lives of Maasai men, women, and children. And so for me, I really came to this space to learn, but also I came from a position of condemning and calling those who hold oppressive power, calling them to book and questioning them and telling them that as East Africans, as women and men, as adults in East Africa, they will not get away with the oppressive, violent dispossession of our brothers and sisters while we are watching. It will not be on our watch. They may intimidate local Tanzanian journalists, they may intimidate human rights defenders in the country, but East Africa is larger than Ngorongoro. East Africa is larger than Dar es Salaam, and we are going to put them under the radar and our gaze, and we shall be speaking out on behalf of our brothers and sisters who may not necessarily be able to speak out because of fear. I have heard of the fleeing of a number of journalists as well as human rights defenders. Well, all of us will not flee from East Africa. We shall keep raising our voices and raising the questions and putting the state of Tanzania on guard. Therefore, I want to thank very much Mwanzo TV for collecting us together. I don't come to beg. Me, I come to negotiate for our freedoms and liberties as an East African woman who has rights and who has the ability to voice and articulate and question and condemn the violence that's meted out to my Maasai brothers and sisters. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stella Nyanzi. Joseph, I'm not sure if you're able to speak now. I see you there. Joseph Ole Shenge, if you're able to speak, maybe you can put your mic on. Fantastic, Joseph. So happy that you're able to speak to us. In the beginning, I was trying to establish, and maybe you can just help us understand the situation in Ngorongoro, and you being a resident of Ngorongoro area, what really is the situation in this area where you come from?
Oh, okay, thank you very much. And I think everyone is hearing me well. Sorry, actually the mic was not working when the event started. So
Sorry about that.
to restate this issue, maybe for everyone to understand better, We are talking of two land disputes, one in Ngorongoro and the other in Loliondo, but affecting one community. That's very important. So the government, because it's like there is sort of tourism industrial complex, because they will say these people are threatening tourism, but the evidence is saying the other way. It is some very complicated things. But at the end, it is the Maasai community being displaced under the pretext of conservation, which is not conservation. Conservation is just the means to get public opinion and get public support, which they need very much. So for better understanding, the Maasai do live lawfully, and this is very important, in Ngorongoro and Loliondo. They has been living there for centuries. They have been there from time immemorial. They can now come and say they are just the recent immigrants, as the president said in the royal tour. But the literature and the Maasai own traditions indicates there has been there for time immemorial, as far as you can narrate. And some literature says at least by 15th century, not from, at least by 15th century, there are documents indicating that they were occupying both Serengeti, Ngorongoro, Loliondo, almost as far as Katesh and Karatu. So for better understanding, so they live there lawfully, but Ngorongoro has been a conservation area since 1959. But a conservation area which has no any title to land. So the Conservation Authority do not have any right or like to dispossess the Maasai or so, because the right of the Maasai to stay has never been extinguished by law. Actually, the law recognizes not only the right to continue living in the area, but gave the authority, the Ngorongoro Conservation Authority, the obligation to develop them. And what now they are doing is entirely a reverse of it. The same applied to Loliondo. The Maasai has been living there, as I said, and by 1951, the colonial government or regime established the game control area. That game control area, by the name, is control game, not like game reserve or so. They were established within local people's home almost. So it was for hunting purpose. It has never taken away the right of the Maasai to stay. So because the government now narratives is saying, because there was an amendment of the law in 2009 for the wildlife conservation, which now concerns Loliondo, not Ngorongoro. And that law particularly stated that now they want to separate between the humans and the wildlife. And the law stated, if there is any game control area now created in 1951, the minister should review them and ensure that not a single of them fall within the village land. And if any fall within the village land, it is not to deregister the village. You get away with the game control. That's what the law says. And that should be done within 12 months. To date, none of the minister or responsible ever reviewed, and the law stated clearly, the minister shall review and like to make justification why they should be continued. So which otherwise, not gazetting is you are telling the law they are unqualified to be continued. So all the village now subject to the land dispute actually in Loliondo are registered village other by 1978. So by law, you cannot establish a game control area, at least by Tanzanian law in that area. So there was an attempt in 2013, which actually failed, and the Prime Minister then wrote a letter, which is now available to publics, stating, telling the local authorities and actually copied to the President, then Kikwete, that this is a village land, and therefore abandons the idea of gazetting it as a game control. That was in 2013. Now the authorities are saying the Maasai are not living there, the place they have been in 2013. which actually the President Kikwete then tweeted in 2013 that they will never actually dispossess the Maasai, the ancestral land. Now they are saying ancestral lands for the Maasai is in Sudan. That was what the Minister for Constitutional Affairs, then was the Minister for Tourism, said your ancestral land is in Sudan. And the President said, you are just the newest immigrant from the Kerio Valley. Now they are like creating those narratives for maybe people who do not understand, and of course they are painting Maasai of many things. So that's how the situation in Loliondo before now coming to the ongoing dispute. So what is now happening? In 2017, there was an attempt to do what is happening now, and not an attempt actually. They banned almost more than 300 Maasai bombers in the contested land now. And the Maasai filed in a case in the East African Court of Justice. And in 2018, the court issued a court order requiring the government to abandon the plan pending determination of the main suit or main reference. And the case was to be actually decided today. And unfortunately, yesterday we got a letter or notification saying the delivery of the judgment has been postponed to September, which we don't know really what happens. But okay, we can leave that. So now, before the delivery date, which was to be 22nd June, the government commenced an operation in Loliondo on 6th June, in violation of the court order. I said, by law, they were not allowed to establish game control within village land under Tanzanian law. Then at least the court stated they should abandon pending determination of the main suit. So there has at least operation undertaken from 6, and the violence we have been seeing all over is a blatant violation of the court orders, is a contempt of court, if we can put that way. So what happened, because no one has been informed, and at least you have that on record even in parliament, including actually today, that no one has been informed of the operations in Loliondo. The paramilitaries were just deployed in Loliondo on 6, 7, 8, and on 9 actually. Almost all political leaders hailing from the land subject to dispute were arrested and taken to Arusha, almost more than 10 of them. And then there was a violence that occurred on 10, which on 11, the authority reported one police to have been sadly murdered. And the Maasai are also reporting that at least 31 people has been severely wounded. The authorities are denying that particular fact. They're saying no one is being wounded, despite the fact that you can hear and actually see the very clear footage and sound and everything, but they're saying nothing's happening. But nothing is happening, and actually the regional commissioner stated the entire security for Arusha and Ngorongoro are on the field for that particular purpose. And 2 days or so ago, the same regional commissioner stated, actually telling the CDF that the commander, actually the brigade commander, and is having the commands in Loliondo, operation, that's what he said, Operation Loliondo and Ngorongoro. So against civilians, now we have been told they are not citizens. You can understand what's happening in Loliondo in that perspective. Briefly about Ngorongoro, and the things has been ongoing seriously at least since January. And actually for the Ngorongoro it started, we got at least the information on 3rd January. But the atmosphere actually changed from 9 February when the matter was referred to Parliament. And part of the member of Parliament actually said in Parliament, advised the government that do not talk to the Maasai, take the military. So what is now happening in Loliondo actually was stated among others by the Mtwara member of Parliament. Do not engage them, deploy the tanks. That's what he actually said. The Prime Minister was in Parliament, Attorney General was in Parliament. They never said that is wrong. there has been spinning all over and all the propaganda, which actually would have mitigated the impact we are now feeling and we are now witnessing. Then by March, they transferred all the money for health, for water, for anything you can think in Ngorongoro Conservation Area. So you have a community of over 93,000 who cannot access anything. Think of the women delivering. Think of people living, of course, with their own life, and any of them wounded maybe. Think of any serious scenario you can think without any functioning health service, intentionally created by the government. And the government spokesperson said on 28 April that we are doing this to ensure that the Maasai relocate. Those are his words. That they has been advised by their stakeholders that the health saving service are the one keeping the Maasai in Ngorongoro. You halt them, they will relocate. So you halt the health service thinking someone would relocate. What happened, for example, if they do not? So it's not only a normal land alienation or annexation of land or a resource dispute, is a crime against over 93,000 people. That's a genocide, if you can really term the meaning of it. So this is what has been ongoing in Ngorongoro Conservation Area, and we have been witnessing, for example, the Medesprit painting Maasai what they can do, saying they do not bury dead bodies. They hand like their people to the wildlife. And again, forgetting what they are saying, now they come with like humanitarian fake rhetoric, saying these people are illiterate, and therefore the only way to educate them, you take them some 600 kilometers away. They say like in everything you can imagine, they are poor. How can you address poverty? You take them some 600 kilometers away. You dispossess, you entirely resettle societies. That's an attack. And actually, if you hear what they're saying about the Maasai. And if you go to answer, actually, because in Ngorongoro, we have the Hadzabe living in some part, and the Barbaik in eastern, almost the edge of the ARC and others. Some member of parliament are saying we can remove the Maasai and leave the society along the ARC. So this is almost a tribal attack, but framed on conservation lens. So why am I saying is not conservation? Because the authority are saying, now I'm coming to general terms, they are saying we are annexing Loliondo to protect Ngorongoro, Serengeti, Ikorongo, Maswa, and Masai Mara, saying is the only source of water. There is not a single river flowing from Loliondo to Ngorongoro or from Ngorongoro to Loliondo. None of them is flowing to Masai Mara. It's just lies. But they can make those lies because many people do not understand. And for the Ngorongoro, so what's the reason? The reason is they want to annex the land for exclusive trophy hunting. They think Maasai are seeing them while committing the wildlife massacre, and they think like they're disturbing the business. So because they think Maasai are unworthy of staying in good places, that's why they are dispossessing them throughout. And the same case applied to Ngorongoro. They are saying it is threatening tourism. Maasai are threatening tourism. But the fact actually in the ministry suggests at least 52% of the proceeds from tourism, the government get it from Ngorongoro. Not Serengeti, not any of the 22 national parks, is from Ngorongoro. And it's the only conservation area where human beings are allowed legally to live. So which otherwise, if it is 52%, you are telling everyone that Maasai are not threatening tourism. The same applies to conservation. And they're saying the population has grown so much. The Maasai, we have at least produced the report and submitted with the minister. The Maasai occupy almost 5% of the area. And the population of livestock, I'm just trying to finish. They are saying livestock number has increased so much. It is not. In 63 years, we have a difference of 3 cows, not 300, 3. So even if, for example, the Maasai were threatening any of those interests, you have seen the royal tour, the president ran a campaign to attack the Maasai, saying they are primitive, saying they are recent immigrants, saying they are polygamists, as if it is a crime to be one. So now, cumulatively, in my opinion at least, Maasai are, I said, they are living there lawfully. And we are talking about human being, because like our Stella said, first, you are dealing with human beings who has their inalienable rights, among them the right to life, which is being threatened in all spheres. You are also talking about citizens of this country, protected by the constitutions to enjoy their citizenship rights, which now to the Maasai, they are being seen as third people, as the president actually said in the THRDC events, that those others will be taking them to some place as if the Maasai are commodities. So generally to say, all the scam you are seeing is not from conservation, but conservation is being used to please and to inspire, like tell other people that this is a good thing, because everything, even myself, like conservation. So everyone can easily accept that narrative. But it is not only dispossession, it is total resettlement of the Maasai. And if this happens, it will mean actually like you are eliminating the Maasai as people not so long, because it's not only happening in Ngorongoro, it is happening through the Maasai land, the proposal by the government, at least to Ngorongoro, Longido, Monduli, Simanjiro, Kiteto in some parts. Then why only Maasai land? Why not other places? Because even promoting what they call the game control is only specifically for the Maasai land. So this is what I can briefly say for everyone to maybe to understand.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Such great knowledge that you've given us, at least an understanding, because a lot of reports have been generated online and everyone has, their thoughts about this particular issue, but we really needed to understand where really is the problem, what is going on. I need to mention something you've mentioned there, and I'll come back. I have so many questions for you, Joseph, as also for Maria, for Stella and Roland. And I also need to mention that Tundu Lissu was to join us. I know he had mentioned that he's not feeling too well, but we do hope that if at all he will be feeling better, he will be able to join us and just help us, especially to understand the land rights issues in Tanzania, just the process. But I'm sure the panel we have now will be able to at least give us some bit of knowledge in that area. I know, Joseph, you mentioned something about the government spokesperson, Gerson Misigwa. I know the VOA Swahili service had quoted and said that he claimed that he was not aware of a court order against evicting the Maasai. That, like you've said, the story is it's just the government trying to conserve the environment. Tanzania is a country rich in resources, and looking at what is happening to the Maasai community, it's really, for many, not really convincing to say that you can met such brutality on a community on the basis of conserving an environment, and that's a violation of human rights, as we've had from many international bodies talking about this. Maria, this is your country, Tanzania. What can you really tell us? The government spokesperson claiming that this is just a move to conserve the environment, claiming that he's not aware of a court order, but then yet we are seeing the military coming out and meting violence and brutality on your people. What do you feel about this?
Well, thank you, Leah, and I'm very happy to have Joseph on the space today to be able to explain. I think for many of the non-Swahili speaking community, especially for media, to understand and get more insight. So I want to also point out that for any international correspondent who might, need more information, this could be a way to connect as well. I think that one of the most important key points, and I really appreciate what Stella has spoken about, has been the impact on the media and the civil society. The type of crackdown that has ensued, the kind of vicious attacks on human rights defenders, saying that they're actually going to check if their citizenship. That is something that I think is really one of the most harshest. But I also think the fact that the level and the kind of propaganda that has been pursued by the government, in particularly when it comes to trying to build a fake narrative that Joseph has talked about, is something that has been very shocking. I don't know to what extent some of the other people who are outside the borders of Tanzania would take this, but just to imagine, it is like having an argument with your government and just, maybe tweeting and saying, this is what I think it's outrageous what the government is doing, and suddenly you're called unpatriotic. You have the entire state machinery turned against you. You have armed and security forces looking for you. I mean, the extent of repression and the cry for help coming from the Maasai community, coming from the human rights defenders and the media that Roland has talked about, has been overwhelming. So I find that this is a very sad time. And I think also that maybe going back later, we could also sort of have a conversation with Joseph about reaching out to the government, which I think that on a personal basis, my opinion is they've done that repeatedly, even reaching out, I think, to the president through her subordinates. I think that we have to come to a point where we need to acknowledge that, nothing is happening without the knowledge of the president. So that would be my quick, sum up and my personal views on this. But I would be very interested also to hear more from the audience as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maria. Definitely I need to mention that this conversation is open to everyone else who's here just listening. If you have questions, if you are a correspondent also trying to seek information, this is a platform open for you to ask the questions to persons like Joseph and Roland, and also Stella Nyanzi, and of course Maria as well. If you need to get information, this is a place to get it. Do not shy away from asking that question. If of course you also have a comment, you have an experience you can share with us from Tanzania or wherever else, it's really open for you to do that. I want you to just take it to Roland, and Amnesty International has been very vocal about this matter, calling on the Tanzanian government to halt the operation. We do know that part of your statement, Roland, the Amnesty International statement, talked about security forces previously being deployed in different years, 2009, 2013, also, of course, 2017. Tell us a little bit about these operations, like what we are seeing right now, some of them that have also happened in the past, targeted at the Maasai community in Tanzania.
Many thanks, Leah, and thanks to the previous speakers. I was really hoping not to speak fast, and I'm really happy that our good advocate, Joseph, has come and really put to perspective, everything, including the confusion that always arises between Ngorongoro and Loliondo. Of course, Loliondo being a division in Ngorongoro district, but they are distinct areas, but again facing the same issues where year in, year out there are cases of evictions, and as I mentioned, that this is actually another attempt. Previous attempts have seen the Maasai people lose their property, where the forced eviction has taken an angle where their houses, their animals, their structures have been destroyed and sometimes even burnt down. And you can imagine, how gross this is, especially when you're thinking about, even the right to housing, right to health, because they're left in the cold, right even to access, the food and many other rights. And this year, just taking another toll whereby, this is affecting, people who have an interest, not even just the Maasai, the people themselves, but people who have an interest in this case. Cases of people threatened and, just by wanting to engage in this case. But again, involvement of security forces has been used previously, and this has been, as I mentioned, to actually use force to bring force in conservation, what we call fortress conservation, whereby conservation is not involving the people that have lived in that land, have conserved that land, have not harmed the environment. These people who have, they have, they are distinctive cultural groups that have a relationship with their land or the territory that they live in. And so we see that the state, and as Stella Nyanzi said, this reflects in, other states within the region. In Kenya, we've seen case of, the Enrois. We've seen the case of the Ogiek being evicted in similar manner. In Uganda, we launched a report in November last year about the case of, the Bennett people of Mount Elgon, evicted in a similar manner, where a state uses force, uses military again, uses warders who even inflict injury and beat up people to evict them from their land, in the pretext of saying that they are doing this for conservation. Because again, in the age whereby everyone is very emotional about issues around climate justice, issues around environmental rights, so it really brings confusion to people and play into the emotions of people who, some of them, would want to argue that, if they are indeed, destroying the land, if they are indeed, being harmful to the environment, then they should be evicted. However, that is not the position. That is not the position. So in the case of Loliondo, we see that since 1992, the government had leased out this particular piece of land, which, under the Village Act, and I would really want Joseph to speak about this, where the Maasai people are entitled to the 1,500 square kilometer of land, plus the 2,500 where they occupy. They're entitled to that. It is lawful. The East African Court of Justice, which was supposed to, make a judgment regarding the case today, just overnight decided to postpone that case, which is, again, another issue that we need to look at in terms of, was there interference and what is really happening in that situation. So since 1992, we see that the state, the Tanzanian government, leased out this land to a private business person or family. And these people have been using the ground as hunting ground. So in other words, for their private use. Years later, as you mentioned in 2009 and all that, these people really wanted to come and develop this land. And so we see a situation whereby the state then had started now, forcefully coming to really tell the Maasai people that now you have to move. Now we have to fence, or now we have to cordon off the area. Now we have to, demarcate the area and really, give it to, the private developer and all that. So even the language of conservation that is now being used, it's not a very sincere language. Years on, 2013, 2017, we saw other cases of forced eviction, and the Maasai people of villages that were affected went to the East African Court of Justice and started adjudicating a case whereby they wanted the government to respect their right to that land. They also filed a separate petition, and this was a petition that the East African Court of Justice agreed with them and ruled that the state, Tanzanian government, should not evict any Maasai from that piece of land until the case, the substantive case, is heard and determined. This is the case whose judgment was supposed to come today. So within that time frame when the judgment of do not evict still stands, a state that should really be, respecting the rule of law, comes in and evicts its own people. So again, as East Africans, as in a question to ask is, we have developed institutions. We have developed institutions such as, the East Africa Community and its organs. These are institutions that should actually be serving us. These are institutions that we should be feeling proud of. We have been told that African solutions for African problems, and we actually run to these institutions where we have access to them. And these are institutions that should protect us, and hoping that states should really, look back and say that, yes, it is a right step that you are not going further, from our regional borders or the continent to look for solutions, in the West and all that. But again, if these avenues where we are seeking justice, are disregarded, then what happens to us? The other issue that we need to really speak about is the issue of those who have been evicted, the issues of those who fled their homes, the issues of those who now are in dire need of, food. They're in dire need of shelter. They're in dire need of medical attention. I was speaking about, a school, in the side of Kenya, hosting more than 40 children, school going. These are children who should actually be in school. They've actually crossed over and they cannot find safety in their own land. What do we do about even, the safety of this group of people? What do we do about people who fled the country for treatment? Remember, for you to be treated in such a situation whereby you are badly harmed, you go to the police stations in Tanzania, definitely just like in Kenya and other jurisdictions. Uganda, this exists too. Stella Nyanzi, you'd confirm. You need to fill a particular form, and this form must be filled by the police and take it to the hospital for you to get treatment. It's called a P3 form here in Kenya. In Tanzania as well, it's from 3P something. And so, you expect the same authority that has, occasioned brutality against you to really, really fill this form for you to go get treatment. So, it is an issue whereby the condemnation should actually, go, and I like, Stella, the way you're calling for accountability, because accountability here should really start at the top. Accountability here should start at the political level, where, even in the political, level up there, we've seen leaders who have tried to dismiss, the conflict that was going on there. And the only admission that happened that, has even brought more light or shed more light into this was when a policeman was killed. And we had, the region leadership come in and say, you know what, we have lost a policeman. And of course, that was actually taken again in an interesting way, because people who were arrested before the policeman was killed are now being charged with murder. You see, again, a situation that is really spiraling, where now we are seeing, trumped up charges. We are seeing issues around fair trial. And again, calling for accountability, calling for justice, calling for, the police, calling for the state to drop trumped up charges and really address the Loliondo issue in a manner in which it is supposed to be addressed. Thank you very much, Leah.
Thank you, Roland. You've mentioned something key there, that there are people who are already arrested even before the state police officer was apparently murdered during the whole clash between the security officials and the Maasai community that was defending their land. Really a sad situation there. We've seen online of accounts of some of the Maasai community members who have fled, and they say, hey, I cannot go to this hospital and get a P3 form because they might actually track me all the way. So it's looking at the situation as it is and just listening to all of you and some of the accounts that we have been able to just get from people who are correspondents all the way from different places, and talking about scenarios where the community members are afraid to speak. And I think Maria talked about that. And I think also Joseph mentioned just the fear of being able to speak. Media, people like us, journalists, we're not being given the leeway to go and talk to these persons who have been affected. Some of them are said to be housed in one of the camps just close to the Kenya-Tanzania border. Really a sad situation there, Roland. And I wanted to just take this conversation to Joel. I see Joel there would like to just make a comment. Joel Kaparia Olemeta wants to say something regarding today's topic. Joel, you can go ahead. All right. I think we'll come back to you, Joel. I do understand that we have Stephen Corey, who is a British human rights defender who has dealt extensively with the issue of Indigenous rights and just being an activist who's defending these rights. Stephen, if you can hear me, we're really, really happy, first of all, to have you here. Quite a lot of experience you've seen you have there defending Indigenous people and their rights. Maybe you can just tell us what your experience has been in the various countries that you've been able to defend the rights of Indigenous people, such as what we're seeing, of course, in Tanzania with the Maasai community. I know Stephen is there with us, and we are connecting with him in a different way tonight. A bit of a challenge there he had. And
yes, we can hear you, Stephen. Go ahead.
Yes, Stephen, go ahead.
Good. Well, thank you for asking me to join this very important and very shocking discussion. It is shocking, isn't it, what's happened? What's doubly shocking is that actually this has been going on for 150 years in different parts of the world, and conservation has been used as a reason to evict and destroy indigenous and local peoples since then, starting in the United States. This is with the creation of things like Yosemite and Yellowstone National Park. This is a colonial invasion of people's territory in the guise of conserving it. And there's not a single major land protected area in Africa which has not involved the eviction of people. And it's going on not only in Tanzania, but elsewhere, particularly in Africa, also in parts of Asia. And frankly, it's time that this was stopped. The narrative presented, as you'll all realize, to the Western world, where I'm speaking from, is that conservation is a great thing, that it's a progressive thing. And in fact, the way it's practiced is completely the reverse. And I think it's also important to bear in mind what are these areas supposedly protected for and from? They're supposedly protected from the local people, the very people who've lived there, who've created these landscapes, who've nurtured them, as you all know. But they're not really protected at all, as you also know. It's to do with profits for those who kick out the people who live there. And that happens whether it's hunting concessions, whether it's mining. The mining has gone on in Botswana and protected areas, many others, mining, exploration, logging, and so on and so forth. And I think we have to realize that it's time that the whole conservation industry is forced to accept that they are no longer calling the shots on this, and they are no longer able to do these kind of land grabs and get away with it. And I think that's what's particularly important about what's going on now in Tanzania, is that this has really reached, in spite of government attempts to suppress the story, it's really reached a sector of the media, in spite of the fact that the Western mainstream media does not want to cover this. That's been very obvious. I've been watching it. But it has now really reached the media, and it's important there should be as big a outcry internationally as possible.
Wonderful comments there. Thank you so much, Stephen. And before I even go to another speaker, Stephen, I know as we spoke earlier on.
Leah, just to make it clear, Stephen cannot hear you because
Okay.
he needed to choose. So I think pose the question and then you have to give me like a couple of minutes to get to him the question. So go ahead, ask the question.
I'll ask the question, and as we give him time, if possible, then we can maybe take it to another speaker if that's okay. But I think my question to Stephen Maria was this. I know earlier on when we spoke, he talked about having a background of the history of conservation evictions, first-hand knowledge, of course, regarding Kenya and Botswana and some of non-African places. Really, I would like to hear from him the experience in defending the rights of the indigenous people, the difficulties, the challenges, the successes, if any. What has it been like for him? Because we are hearing of the Maasai community. He's been doing this for a long time. Success stories, challenges. I'd like to hear that from you, Stephen.
Okay. Just give me a minute.
All right. Well, great comments there. I just want to take it back to you, Stella, and just listening to some of the things that especially Stephen has mentioned, that this is not a new issue. It's something that has been going on throughout the world and not just in Africa, that it's something that needs to end at this moment. I know, like you mentioned, human rights defenders find it very difficult to even be vocal, especially in African countries like your country, where you have faced the full wrath of the hand of the government. Of course, also, we do know different human rights activists in Kenya and, of course, Tanzania have faced sort of the same resistance from the government in addressing some of these issues. But Stella, really, what can we do as human rights defenders to make our voice still be heard and not be silenced in the wake of such injustice?
Right, thank you. So, Leah, your question, I think for me, is a question I wanted to throw back to Joseph in response to some of the local reality explanations he gave. And I think that it was important that Joseph came and spelled out for us who are not in Tanzania what's actually happening. I think for me, one of the first questions I want to know within Tanzania is the level of land rights organizing or broader indigenous rights organizing. To what extent can Maasai people organize? To what extent are they organized enough to speak back to power if as a community they are not? What about the Tanzanian civil society organizations? Do they call out people like the prime minister and the minister of, I think it was tourism, and the president herself, and the Arusha police officers who have been speaking hate speech really in the public media? Are there fronts for local organizing, for activists, grassroots organizing to speak truth to power and call them out? One of the things I think that this is called Corey said is he's said it's that the issue has received publicity in the media scape, and he says international solidarity is important. I talked about East African solidarity in terms of if it's too dangerous to speak out when one is in Tanzania, is it possible to have land rights activists, human rights activists, indigenous rights activists speaking out on the issue and calling Tanzanian authorities to power? I think very much that the executive and the parliament and the judiciary have been named in this conversation. All are implicated in the historical long-term violations meted out against the Maasai people in Ngorongoro. And I think for me that therefore there is necessarily an element of speaking truth to the state, which has all the instruments of violence, including ammunition and prisons and even accusation. They can charge you with trumped up charges. And so I hear the centrality of power and powerlessness. And so how do we overturn the seeming abusive, oppressive privilege that the state has? And clearly the state is invested in this question. If they're withholding access to hospital services and medication, access even to education, as Joseph has ably explained, this is public state-instituted power. So part of my question is, how then do we organize a vulnerable community that's being displaced and attacked and also othered? So the most important critique for me towards her excellency and her cabinet ministers and her armed officers, whether military or police, is how dare they other Tanzanian citizens? Why are they pushing them away and alienating them and saying they came from Sudan and saying they are backward and primitive? And what is this about? So citizenship in relation to power, how do people who are fighting for citizenship rights get involved? And so I think for me that one of the things that could happen as local organizing is to call for a coalition of people around conservation, tourism, land rights, livelihood rights, right to life, right to health, freedom of movement, indigenous rights, to come together in a coalition form. But are there any organizings around rights in Tanzania? I know it's perhaps not as easy as it is for other places. The role of civil society organizations, especially those that have articulation ability outside in Tanzania, but also people who can voice from outside, is important. I think that capacity building of the communities and the community leaders is important. But part of my challenge is I don't know what the situation on the ground in Tanzania is. And maybe the very last point in terms of contribution is if there is possibility within the local Tanzanian media to begin calling out these different agents of state power, right from Her Excellency to her ministers, when they say these hateful statements, when they alienate in their public discourse, when they overturn who should be charged for murder and who is responsible for violence against the Maasai, is it possible for whether foreign correspondents or local Tanzanian journalists to call out this rhetoric and call out the abusers of power who are violating access to public media space, especially to do so in Kiswahili, which is the main language of instruction and communication? But I think for me that the questions are really questions around, and I see that Maria is back, so I will hand back the mic and maybe also step down from the platform so that I can allow others to speak. They may have better answers to some of the questions I've posed. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stella. Maria, I see your hand up. You can go ahead.
Yes, I actually wanted to respond to Stella's really great question. And I wanted to say that actually there is a really important movement going on at this moment in time. And we welcome anybody who is ready in any country to organize a demonstration. It can be in front of the if there's a diplomatic mission in Tanzania in that country, or we can also find something. So I am aware of a few groups that are already organizing, but we need more, and we need international activists, media also to support us in that. And definitely, I know that a lot of the diaspora has reached out to me saying, it's great you're putting out information. It's great that we're seeing all these articles coming out. What can we do? So what I can do is just connect people. So I'm not going to be part of it, but I can connect people. And that, I think, is what we usually do as media. So that is something that I really wanted to put out there. And the second is with the local media, I really think that the intimidation level is so high. Just to make it clear, one of the online TVs actually is going through a process right now. They've been summoned by authorities. They might get suspended, which is going to be terrible. I've experienced that. It means that your livelihood is suddenly taken away. They will come at you in the most heavy-handed manner you can imagine. So I just really want everybody who is outside Tanzania to know we're dealing with a regime that is very heavy-handed. And let's not forget, this is just a continuation of the same Magufuli regime, unfortunately.
Thank you, Maria. I'm not sure if we have Stephen Corey back. Maria, we'd like to just maybe pose the same question. We had posed the question to you, Stephen, if you can hear me, basically asking the question of you have been working with indigenous people, defending their rights across the globe. I know you have a bit of knowledge regarding Kenya, Botswana, and some of non-African countries, but it's just to understand, Stephen, how the experience, how has it been? Have you experienced any kinds of successes towards defending some of these rights of the indigenous people across the globe, and perhaps even just challenges? What are some of the key challenges that you've noted, and just legal backing that has worked during your activism?
Yes, you can go ahead, Stephen. Stephen, you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that it's important to realize the sort of dual aspect of these so-called protected areas. In many countries, they contain local peoples who live there, own property there, and carry on living there perfectly happily. And the difference between those areas and the places where they are excluded and thrown out is fundamentally to do with the strength of the local people, their numerical strength, and whether they are able to basically say they are simply not going to be moved. And in that kind of context, then the protected area works around them and works with them and in proper collaboration. In Botswana, there was a similar 85 years ago concerning people called the Bushmen, anthropologists call them San, in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, which is the world's second biggest game reserve. And they've lived there for forever, so far as anybody knows, and the government tried to get them out. Now, the Bushmen took the government to court. It turned out to be the longest court case ever in the Botswanan High Court. But in the end, the Bushmen did win and win the right to maintain themselves on their ancestral land. Now, not everybody can do that. It takes a lot of time. It took years. It took a great deal of lawyers working pro bono with necessary expenses, and it went on and on and on. But I think one has to look at, if you like, there's a soft underbelly to this fight, even within the oppressive regimes. And that is that this fortress conservation that Joseph has described, this is backed by the Western NGOs. And of course, in the whole Serengeti region, it was this former Nazi officer who, working for the Frankfurt Zoological Society, who was desperate to get the local peoples out from the 1950s and 60s, and in many cases successfully. The Frankfurt Zoological Society is still there. It's still active in Tanzania. It's very highly respected in Germany. Germany is very keen to present its conservation work as being progressive. And yet, when these NGOs operate in this colonial sense, they are completely complicit in the eviction, in the destruction of these local peoples, and indeed backing a lot of it with money, with Western money, including Western taxpayers' money. So there is an aspect of this in which people, say in my position, can try and raise these issues with the NGO sector, with the conservation sector, which is terribly, they lie, they evade the question, they say things that haven't happened. If they're finally caught out, they call for a report and make 2 years to come through, and then they censor it and manipulate it. So one should be under no illusions that they are also a tough nut to crack. But they are dependent very much on a good progressive image vis-a-vis the public, in spite of all the crimes they're involved in. And this is a point where they can be attacked. And we should be aware that this movement to protect so-called protected areas, which is basically for their financial benefit, they will sell carbon credits and all kinds of things on them. They're wanting to double the size of protected areas throughout the world over the next few years, double it, to make 30% of the globe so-called protected. So this is a battle, not just in Loliondo and Ngorongoro and Tanzania and the Serengeti. This is an international battle, which is fought over who controls this land and its resources, and is it basically going to be the same old colonial powers as before, or are local peoples actually going to be able to take it to retain and take back control over their own land? So we should make no mistake about the size of this struggle. They've attempted to get profit out of everything else they can. Now they're going for the land itself and water resources and things like that. So I think there are multiple ways in which people all around the world can have an impact and effect on this situation.
Thank you, Stephen. Really good comments there, just to understand that the situation in Tanzania, of course, like Stephen says, is not just special to Tanzania. It's an issue across Africa and, of course, globally there. Thank you again, Stephen, for those comments. I know, Joseph, one thing that has really come out, and I think Stella also mentioned it, we need to understand the land rights, because I know we've talked about the situation, the human rights injustices, and just exactly what's happening in terms of just the constitutional rights being violated. Joseph, I have this question, and I think I'll ask it on behalf of the other speakers who have mentioned it, is the question of who really owns the land? Might look maybe a bit obvious for some, but really we need to hear from you, Joseph. Who owns the land that is being contested by the government and that the Maasai community has declined to let go of?
Okay. Thank you very much, Leah. And I think to start to put it into perspective, I think many people, including Stella, before coming to a question, said, and actually including Steve, that the issue is historical, and actually it is. The Ngorongoro crisis today has element of colonialism. It has never been decolonized, and this is the really problem of it. Steve has said how the Nazis, how the colonial, how the Americans, to mean the Yellowstones and others, National Park, influenced the today dogma in Tanzania conservation. So we are being affected by the system that has been created over decades. And particularly, he said about the influence. The influence, actually, we are now saying of the Frankfurt Zoological Society, which is financing the Ngorongoro, Serengeti, Loliondo evictions in terms of like providing incentive and so forth. But actually, they participated. The president, Lee Tablot of the ICUN, for example, led a 33 organization of the US then to ensure that the Maasai are evicted from Serengeti. Frankfurt participated through longest president, Bernhard Gremzek, who was actually the Hitler Zoo director. So there are some sort of fascism and Nazi element anyway. We see those even today. We're just not saying they are Nazis, but surely they are. Now coming to your questions. Who own land? Now, under this system now, they're saying, actually, when it comes to the Maasai, they say the president own land. That many of the ministers said in parliament that the president own land. Now, under Tanzanian law, the land has been categorized into several regimes, but generally, all land is public land, and the president is a trustee, not the owner. A trustee is no different from an administrator of the estate when a person died and leave the kid who cannot manage the land ownership. or distributing the properties, then a person will be appointed to administer. And now he will be acting on behalf of the beneficiary. So the president powers over land is a trustee. And the law specifically states that the president cannot alter ownership to land. He cannot acquire, because there is a law like land acquisition, cannot acquire land unless the president must disclose the public interest he or she want to protect. So it's not like just grabbing at will. It is not, at least under Tanzanian law. And the Tanzanian constitution particularly recognize everyone right to own property, and the property include land. That is the constitutional right at Article 2024. But now the land law say the president as a trustee of the land. And one particular section, section 4 sub 2, I don't want to mention section to confuse many people, states the president or anyone acting on behalf of the president, while now changing land use, must take the interest of the people, must put the welfare of the people and the development of communities first. That's what the law says. So in this particular case, and the Tanzanian law actually, because there are several forms of now land ownership, there are those people having the cards, having the title, which is registered. And substantial part of the Tanzanian land is not registered. So it is actually the minority who own registered land. But Tanzanian law recognizes also, and there has been the case since colonial time, that people can also own land traditionally using customary rights. And a majority of the Tanzanian people own land through customary means. It is the land they have been occupying from time immemorial, before the colonial regime came, which otherwise precedes the Tanganyika and Tanzania governments. At least the Tanzanian law recognizes and states that the right of that person owning the land using title deeds is the same as a person using the customary right. Is no different, like because someone has the card or a title, is having a better title than the other. And that's why I said, when Ngorongoro was created, because we are talking to this particular case, it has never extinguished the Maasai customary right. Never. Actually, to date. So, because the law also do not recognize like some sort of double location, Ngorongoro Conservation Area Authority do not have right to land. They do not have any ownership to land. And actually, their report in 2019, one of the recommendations of the Ministerial Committee was that Ngorongoro Conservation Area should be given right to land because they do not have. So they are dispossessing people the right to land as if the land is theirs. It is not. So to put it briefly, the president is in no way the owner of the land. It's like when a person is being sued, then we say the republic. So the president, what we are saying, this is a public land for everyone, which otherwise the regime through the president like will be the overseer of the land, not the owner. To put that question briefly that way. So it's not the owner. People individually own land under Article 24. It recognizes that. And therefore the Maasai, and one of the complications actually that now why so much of the Maasai land is being disposed actually, it relates so much on how the Maasai actually own land. They own it communally. And so because they're pastoral society, they always like, it's not like farmers, because a farmer, you can demarcate the boundaries of the farms. And for the Maasai, they just have home and now a trunk of lands which they regard as their pasture lands. And now when the regime come and the people with money, they see that as an empty and idle land. And that has been actually the remarks by the like of Grimsek, Dr. Louis Leakey, and many others actually, including in part of the Royal Tour. They see like this is a land without anyone. Those has been the same remarks actually when the colonial regime went to Australia and say the entire Australia is a no man land, while actually there were Aboriginals. And they think Those are not people anyway. They are subhumans. The same way now the government is regarding the Maasai. If you are really to listen every single statement, and especially with the president-led royal tour. So over land ownership, not only Maasai, because we are talking of the Maasai because they own land in a sense of indigenous community own land cumulatively like a society. But within them, they have that individual now land ownership who has the house where and so forth. So it is not true that the president owns land. It is not. Never. Not in any law. Not the land law, nor the constitution, nor the land acquisition. And even the land acquisition actually recognizes that when the president wants to acquire land for public interest, which must disclose, even the pasture land must be counted as the property of the person using, because now they recognize the user factory rights.
All right, thank you so much, Joseph, for those comments. I think one thing I'd love to.
Sorry, the thing I want. Okay, I was to comment actually. Actually, one of the questions you posed before Stella about Loliondo, and why are we saying it is not, because they are saying it's a conservative area. And I said actually it was established in 1951. But I said they had only the right to hunt, not to own land. And I said at least that was the situation until 2010, because the law was changed in 2009. And that law specifically stated you cannot like establish anything within the village land. So which otherwise, because in Tanzania, the village also has like natural person, like a legal person, not natural person, a legal person status, which otherwise they can own land and they can be given title to land. And not only that, the village in Loliondo are registered. They have also the land, registered land for every single particular, or for almost 7 or so village, which now they have actually become political wards with several villages within. So the land is registered as village land, is registered, and they have never revoked actually. So if they were, for example, intended to acquire it lawfully, which otherwise you cannot, because the law states you must extinguish the game control, not the village land. But a more sober and civilized person will think of revoking even the village, the village land title, which will be now an evil scheme, but at least using the law. Now what they're doing, they are grabbing it entirely using the military. But they're saying the old Loliondo game control area is in force, but now creating another game control area within. That is telling wise people that it is not a game control area. This is why you are creating a new, because you cannot create two game control area, one within the other. It is because that game control area is dead by 2010. And the Tanzanian law states now, at least from 2009, no one is allowed to live within game control. If that is the case, if government version of the story is true, they are telling us more than 100,000 people has been living illegally, including the government officials, including those arresting everyone. They has been living for 13 years illegally. That cannot be the spirit of the law. Now that's just trying to justify without really going to the root of it.
Thank you, Joseph. You mentioned something very key there, that if then the Tanzanian government says that the Maasai should leave, and yet they have been living on that ancestral land for so many years, so does that mean they have been living there illegally in the first place? That's a very good question. And in just relation to that, Joseph, I'll still come back to you. Then what would be the ideal or the right or stroke legal process that the Tanzanian government should follow at this time in initiating perhaps just the process of moving the Maasai community from the ancestral land? What's the right process really? Joseph, that's a question for you.
Okay. like you are saying, if they want to remove the Maasai, and what are the legal process to do that?
Yes, because as we see, the Maasai
Okay.
community is resisting, and the Tanzanian government is exerting force upon the community to get them out and evicted forcibly. Then what is the due process that the Tanzanian government should be following at this time?
Actually, that law they are relying, actually, state particularly, that despite the fact that I said earlier that no game control should fall within village land. So if it fall within village land, it is illegal to acquire in any means. So to begin with that. But that law states, if the government want to like gazette or establish any game control area anywhere, they must consult the local authority. Not only game control, but game reserve included. They must consult the local authorities to acquire the consent of the citizens. This has not been done in Loliondo, and this is why all the political leaders are now in the prisons with the murder case of a person allegedly murdered one day after the arrest, because they have not been consulted. So any means of acquiring land, and that's why I said, one, even if the president, because our law are sad enough to say that the president can change the land status, but by establishing the public interest. So how do you disclose the public interest? You must also include the people who will be affected. And the law actually states, of course, there are some sort of opposition and others. But the spirit of the law is say the public interest. In this particular case, I really do not know any public interest that require total resettlements of societies. Because the proposal by the government, we are just saying of the Ngorongoro and Loliondo scenarios here. But I said earlier, Longido entirely, the government is proposing to make it a game reserve. Simanjiro, a substantial part of Monduli, and no other area other than the Maasai land. So actually, it is an attack of the Maasai under conservation rhetorics. There is no public interest that can justify that. It's like saying, okay, because you are 1 million, we are attacking you to benefit some 60 million people. There is no public interest that allow killing one person for the interest of the other. There is none. And if this scheme succeed, doesn't mean you are taking the land. Many people do not understand. Maasai has a very systematic attachments to land, and not simply every land. You are not just like taking them some kilometers, 600 kilometers away, and say there is a land here. How is that land related to their spirituality? How is that land related, for example, for ethnomedical, which is they always use for treatment and others? How is that land suitable for pastoralism, which to the Maasai is both an economic and also some sort of spirituality again? How is that land like the identity and many other things? So it's not only like you are taking a 1,500 square kilometers. You are not only resettling people, you are not only evicting, threatening them and run to Kenya. It means their identity as people will be eliminated in the near future. And that is not right. And that is not just, and that is not lawful, at least by Tanzanian law, let alone the international commitment that Tanzania has made. So it's not just like we're saying a certain portion of land will be, we're setting it for tourism, and you'll get compensations of the land. Not only land. If you go to, for example, many of the Tanzanian actually know, you go to the Creta, Maasai have cultural right of passage within the Creta floor. Will you carry the Creta to Andeni? No. So which otherwise do not disturb the Maasai. Will you take Oldonyo Lengai to like leg zone? No. Then leave the Maasai alone. Because even Tanzanian law at least recognize that everyone has the right to religion, the spirituality, and others. So it's not like minor things we are saying just about the property, then the land, and not small things. It is what makes the Maasai a distinct society. It is not only like you see them, so much things will be affected entirely. And sadly, as Stella said, the president is not only silent, the president is participating in these schemes. At least he has said severally on record, and at least the prime minister said everything we are doing, the president has instructed. But again, someone has said about the Tanzanian media, that is a non-vocabulary in Tanzania. They are not just not doing what they should have done. They are complicit to what is ongoing. Actually, some of the media has said Maasai do not bury dead bodies. So extreme that way. So how to teach them to bury? Take them to Andeni. So every single scenario is being created, sponsored by the state, but ultimately making conclusions that the only solution is to take the Maasai some 700 kilometers away. They are illiterate, take them to Andeni. There are no hospital, take them to Andeni. They do not have food, take them 700 kilometers away. That's how this is being developing. And I was, of course, responding to the land, but I think it has been understood.
Thank you, Joseph. I'll still come back to you because I have at least 2 more questions regarding some of the things that you've mentioned. I do see we have a few speakers here who would like to just participate in this conversation. I see you, Joel. Joel, you can go ahead. Joel Kaparia Olemeta, can you hear me? If you can just tap on the icon that looks like a microphone on your screen at the bottom left, that would enable you to speak. If you can hear me, Joel. All right, seems we are not able to connect with Joel. I'm sure perhaps he'll be able to make his comments soon. I see also Amani Isaiah, who is with us today. Amani, if you can hear me, you can go ahead and make your comment. Amani, can you hear me? All right, we seem to have also lost Amani there, but okay, let me give another person an opportunity. I see Steve Parmuat there. Also, you want to make a comment, you can go ahead. Steve, if you're seeing an icon that seems like a small microphone on your bottom left, you can tap on it. That will enable you to speak. If you can hear
Joel.
me.
We have Joel. I think Joel's on. Steve is on. Joel, can you try to switch on?
I think maybe we can start with Steve because I see his mic is on. Steve, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Leah. And actually, I just want to say thank you all of you for having this.